Lawyers of Reddit, what's a case you regretted winning? Story 1. I do juvenile work, criminal law, and family law. I represented this client first when he was a juvenile charged with disorderly conduct at school and fighting, then when he became an adult it was for simple things like possession of marijuana. As he got older, it became easier and easier to figure out what part of his life hasn't gone as well as it could, and I tried to counsel him and push him to better himself. He got his GED, he started going to NA, he started classes at a community college, and found a part-time job. On the night of his 21st birthday, he was charged with a DWI. Of course, I'll take care of that too. About 6 months later, we are due in court for trial on a Monday, and he doesn't show up, which at this point in his life is highly unusual. As I'm trying to figure out where he is, the court starts going over arraignments/first appearances, and then lo and behold 3 people are up for murder charges. The prosecution starts to tell the judge what the facts/circumstances of the case are and mentions a few victims' names. Apparently, my client was at a party when these 3 individuals decided to allegedly do a drive-by shooting. My client suffered multiple gunshot wounds and didn't make it to the hospital. So, by default, as you can't prosecute a dead person, the state has to take a dismissal. I guess technically a win. Either way, it was crushing to me as I thought he had really turned his life around. He had. Story 2. Prosecuted a murder case. 21-year-old kid starts dating an older guy's ex-girlfriend. The older guy, real roughneck, loose connections with a local biker gang, was going all over his small town talking about how he was going to kick the kid's ass. The older guy sends some nudes of the ex while he's getting drunk at a bar, so the kid says something smart-ass in response. Older guy comes to the kid's house to fight him. The kid shoots him once, and the older guy dies. Jury didn't buy self-defense or castle doctrine. Convicted of voluntary manslaughter. 20 years. Burned up his appeals with no luck. I have a son about the kid's age. I could totally imagine him doing the exact same things if he were in a similar situation. Shit's going to haunt me until I die. No doubt about it. Started thinking about other work the moment the verdict came back. Story 3. Did a divorce where the husband, who I was representing, wanted to trade custody of his children for a set of bedroom furniture. The bedroom furniture was not even like a family heirloom. It was furniture that you could probably get at a Rooms To Go or something. Ugh, still makes me ill. That's why I got out of family law. Story 4. I'm a work comp attorney. Now represent injured people, but used to work on other side insurance defense. There was an applicant with a serious injury. Fell off a ladder, busted back with fusion, shoulder fucked, years of treatment. Internal issues, psych issues really just fucked up. 50% plus permanent disability. We were 5 years in and finally getting to settlement time. If we bought out his future medical, settlement pretty far into 6 figures. This guy was the sole provider for wife and 2 kids. Then we found out he had aggressive brain cancer. Expected only couple years to live, at best. Thus, we wouldn't buy out future medical anymore. Still got permanent disability for $60K-ish, but can't give medical buyout based on 25-plus year life expectancy anymore. I felt terrible for the guy and his family. Me and the adjuster tried to get insurance to agree to some sort of amount like 5-year buyout, but the bean counters said hell no. The attorney knew it wasn't me making the decision. Even though he worked on that guy's file for 5+ years, he decided to take $0 in fees. I have so much respect for that attorney turning down $10,000 plus in fees to help his client in a very shitty situation. Story 5. Was representing the government at a social benefits tribunal. The applicant was an autistic man who was struggling to make ends meet but was trying his absolute best to contribute everything he could to society. He had a job where his manager was very accommodating and he was a very sympathetic person. He just wanted the extra cash to make his life a little easier for himself. Sadly, he didn't qualify for the benefit, but I think he deserved it. My closing argument was that no matter how much we empathized with this man, no matter how deserving we thought he was, he simply didn't qualify and the tribunal had to apply the law. He was unsuccessful, and when I left the building to head back to my office, he was just sitting outside on the curb crying. That image has stuck with me for a few years. Pretty heartbreaking. Story 6. There was a case that I saw that involved a claim with fee shifting, meaning that if the plaintiff won, their attorney's fees would get paid by the defendant. Defendant pushed an aggressive legal position at trial that the judge agreed with and won, avoiding a few thousand in liability to the plaintiff and a few thousand in attorney's fees. So far, so good. But then the plaintiff appeals all the way to the state's high court, requiring a ton of briefing and time. High court agrees with plaintiff, reverses and sends back to the trial court, which now enters judgment against the defendant for a few thousand in damages against the plaintiff and tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees from the appeal. The defense lawyer probably regretted winning at first on that aggressive argument to the trial court. Story 7. In one of my first cases after passing the bar exam, a young man retained me on a drunk driving charge. No one was hurt, but he totaled his car. During trial, the arresting police officer testified that my client was clearly drunk at the accident scene, and that my client was loudly blaming the accident on the fucking asshole who stole his car, crashed it, and then fled before the cops arrived. However, according to 2 other witness statements tendered into evidence, it was my client's friend, the passenger, who was screaming about the asshole who stole the car, not my client, the driver. The cop must have confused the 2 men during his testimony. This discrepancy raised a reasonable doubt in the judge's mind, so she acquitted my client. At the time, the acquittal was somewhat unexpected for me. In my personal view, my client was clearly drunk and responsible for the accident, regardless of who was blaming the mystery asshole to the cops. But I was happy my young client got off, no one was hurt, and lessons were learned. And I was quite euphoric to have won my first criminal case. The regret? About a month after the acquittal, my young client called me at 3 a.m. from the police station saying it's me again. The police arrested me for drunk driving again. Can you help me? Not only did I answer no, I instantly regretted getting the earlier acquittal. My client apparently didn't learn any lessons. Story 8. Had this happened to me twice. Got my client out on bail only to thereafter have him up and killed. First time, he was in building supposedly selling, got chased by the police, and a struggle ensued where he was shot point blank in the head. Mother told me that it was my fault that he was killed and that I was working with the DA and the police. Second time, a young man no more than 16 gets released while waiting trial on robbery. One of the conditions of release was that he maintain a curfew. That very night he breaks curfew, goes over to somebody else's house, and was killed in a drug-related robbery. Mother blamed me and said that the devil was working through me, that we were all demons. Criminal defense is a hard business. Story 9. I work in medical malpractice defense. Once I had an obstetrician/gynecologist who burned a patient during a procedure. When I met with the doctor, he lied to me throughout the representation over 16 months, saying he had no idea how it happened. There is a doctrine in law called residential ipsa, meaning absent some sort of negligence, this accident could not have occurred. Woman came in without a burn, and after the procedure, the woman left with a burn. There's no way this doctor didn't know what had happened. The area of the burn was where he was operating on. It wasn't until I brought up settlement, because this was not a case we could win, did he say, "Oh, maybe I do know what happened." We ultimately settled that case, which is considered a favorable outcome considering the potential high monetary verdict. Sometimes I think this doctor really ought to have lost that case and their license. Story 10. I got a spoiled brat of a teenager cleared of a shoplifting charge when he absolutely had done it. His rich parents hired me to represent him. I did that to the best of my ability, and we went to trial and won, but I can't say I felt good about it. This kid needed to be taught some accountability for his actions, and his parents just wanted to buy their way out of any trouble he got into. Story 11. I'm a work comp attorney. Now represent injured people, but used to work on other side insurance defense. There was an applicant with a serious injury. Fell off a ladder, busted back with fusion, shoulder fucked, years of treatment. Internal issues, psych issues really just fucked up. 50% plus permanent disability. We were 5 years in and finally getting to settlement time. If we bought out his future medical, settlement pretty far into 6 figures. This guy was the sole provider for wife and 2 kids. Then we found out he had aggressive brain cancer. Expected only couple years to live, at best. Thus, we wouldn't buy out future medical anymore. Still got permanent disability for $60K-ish, but can't give medical buyout based on 25-plus year life expectancy anymore. I felt terrible for the guy and his family. Me and the adjuster tried to get insurance to agree to some sort of amount like 5-year buyout, but the bean counters said hell no. The attorney knew it wasn't me making the decision. Even though he worked on that guy's file for 5+ years, he decided to take $0 in fees. I have so much respect for that attorney turning down $10,000 plus in fees to help his client in a very shitty situation. Story 12. I do family law, and I represented a father who had lost most of his custody from heroin use and imprisonment as a result. He came to me saying he was clean and doing good and had his life together, and it checked out. He had been clean for almost 9 months, not counting jail time, and seemed sincere in wanting to resume a full relationship with his son. The other side fought viciously to keep him at extremely little custody and supervised at that, but we prevailed and got an order restoring fairly frequent unsupervised partial custody. Not long afterwards, only about 3 months after the case, he was back doing heroin, sold most of his furniture, and for me the most soul-crushing is that he set up a fake GoFundMe stuff for his child's cancer. His child didn't have cancer and has never had cancer, so you know where that money was going. I withdrew my appearance at this point, so I don't know what happened afterwards, but I imagine and hope his custody was taken away. Basically, the net result of winning that case was that the poor boy had to witness his father relapse on heroin and was exploited for money. Worst case I ever won. Story 13. This probably won't be the best answer, but it is a real one. After law school, I had to turn down a criminal defense job offer because my wife got a better offer somewhere else. So basically, I followed her along and was desperate to find something. After 3 months of fruitless efforts, I would take just about any job that required a JD, whereas literally the only thing I ever wanted to do was criminal defense. 3 months after moving, I got an interview for a real estate litigation job. They hired me the next day. Looking back, that was probably red flag number 1. First day on the job, they taught me how to foreclose on a claim of lien. These are 2 things I had never heard of before. Turns out, it is totally brainless work if you have the right forms, mind-numbingly boring, basically just cutting and pasting new addresses and amounts owed. So anyways, it took me about 2 months to realize this when I had my first set of hearings, but literally my sole purpose at the firm, which represented over 100 homeowners associations, was to take people's houses away for not paying their homeowners association dues. After my first set of foreclosures, I actually slipped into a pretty legitimate depression. I was getting paid peanuts to drive nearly an hour to work every day to do work I despised on behalf of people I literally could not pretend to care about. The straw on the camel's back was when I started signing the foreclosures and realized I was that guy. You know? I understand someone has to do the work. I guess there certainly is a lot of money to be made, but it was not for me. I did that job for 3 months, came home one Friday, and told my wife I'd rather be homeless than go back on Monday. By some stroke of luck, I started a stellar criminal defense job within 2 weeks, and all of the heartache has 100% been worth it. I've won a lot of cases. You have to redefine winning and losing when doing criminal defense, because sometimes even a particularly juicy plea is a win-mo, and never once felt bad about it. For example, I got a guy's plea deal cut from 60 years to 15 years for a string of robberies where the interrogations and confessions were overwhelmingly unconstitutional, like, the interrogations were textbook How Not to Do an Interrogation, Missouri versus Seibert, and stuff like that. Never lost sleep over someone not going to jail. So yeah, every case where I took someone's house away, probably 24 times, for not paying HOA fees, generally $4,000 or less, was the worst case I ever won. Fuck HOAs. Story 14. In the spring of 2018, I was a third-year practicing intern at a public defender's office. As the job entailed, I dealt with a lot of clients who were facing time, but none really blew my mind than the following. Sometime in that spring, I got up every morning as usual, drove to the office, located in a building with the courthouse, and picked up the files for the supervising attorney. I did this because I liked having the exposure with other attorneys, whether prosecutors or defense counsel. On this day, a file was scheduled for a probation violation hearing. I looked over the file, and the client had 3 years of probation. I found this very odd due to the initial charge, possession. Regardless, I thought another one because, as awful as it may sound, it really was another one. It wasn't the first PV and wouldn't be the last. Even so, I go to the docket call, case is called, I say attorney, we move on. In the same room, are POs, their office located floors above the PDs. I go into the holding cell to talk to the client. I ask out, and a white male, 30 to 35, comes up. I introduce myself, tell him what and who I am, etc. The first words out of his mouth were $600. I didn't know what that meant or what was going on. So I asked him to find out. What I quickly learned was that this client was mentally impaired. He spoke as if he struggled to form sentences that one may consider coherent and intelligent. During our conversation, he kept bringing up the fact that he didn't do anything, and that he is paying every month, etc. And, probably due to my lack of experience, I kept trying to steer him towards the issue. Why did he violate his probation conditions? It didn't even cross my mind that, hold on, maybe he did not actually do it. I left the cell, and talked with the public defender, told him the situation. Sometime later, after handling a few other cases, as you would do it on a daily basis, we went to talk to him again. This time, I just watched and listened. Immediately upon introducing himself, $600. I done paid it. Can't shake those words off. Throughout the discussion, the money was being brought up over and over, so I decided to figure out what he meant. I went to the clerks, asked for his information. Now I understood. He had fees of over $2,000, and all he had left to pay was $600. As probably all of you know, you don't pay, you are in violation. Back in the slammer. So, in his mind, he thought he was there because he wasn't deemed to have paid. The reality was much worse and different. After a mini investigation, I determined the halfway house, or similar to the IDEA, he resided. I contacted the wonderful old woman who ran it, if you will. She gave me details that this man, although he knew, could not regurgitate and express. Turns out his PO was a scumbag. He had gone to the halfway house, told our client what a piece of shit he was and how he was a waste of DNA. He proceeded to go into the kitchen, sat down, and brought out his service firearm. Then, he ordered our client to go into the backyard. Our client did. PO told him to dig a grave for himself and told him to use the PO's gun to shoot himself in the head. All of this done in front of the old lady. On the day of the case, I called and she immediately came to testify for him. The judge dismissed the case. Found out later, the PO was sexually assaulting others and was let go. Never had the chance to meet him face to face. Story 15. Settled a personal injury case for a guy and he was set to get about $5,000. He was in jail. I held the money for a couple months, and when he got out he came by to get the money without delay. The next day the cops came around and asked if I knew him. I explained that I did. I was told he died that night of an overdose, and the only thing found on him was my card, some drugs he had not yet used, and a needle. Story 16. Little late to the party, but I've got one I still think about a lot. Worked in criminal defense, represented a guy in a DUI. He had priors, so another conviction meant time, loss of license, problems. Long story short, he was pulled over by police after they followed him leaving a bar. At trial, I elicited admissions from the arresting officer that during the 2.5 miles he followed him for, he did not observe a single moving violation, no speeding, erratic driving, driving over the lines, blowing stop signs, running red lights. Didn't even stop suddenly at red lights. Also got the DRE officer to testify that the accused only spoke Spanish and they couldn't get an interpreter officer to the roadside to explain the field sobriety exercises, which the officers documented the accused refused to perform. Jury came back in 15 minutes. Guy was extremely grateful, and his lovely family was very gracious in thanking me and our office. Feel good about the whole thing. Couple months later, I'm in county to meet with a client, and I see him in one of the pods. Find out sometime after the trial he violently sexually assaulted his 8-year-old stepdaughter. Think about that one a lot. Story 17. Third-year law student in a clinic. I came into law school with a very clear moral compass. I knew what I wanted to do, criminal defense, and I had very strong feelings about the death penalty. I thought there was never a situation that warranted it. Cut to me working in my school's death penalty clinic. The way the clinic worked was that you'd typically be assigned 1 to 2 clients, review their case, visit them, and do research at the discretion of the supervising attorneys. I had one client, and his case will haunt me for the rest of my life. Goes in for life after a really brutal assault on a teenager during a burglary. Proceeds to move to more and more secure facilities after numerous guard stabbings and an escape attempt. But that wasn't what got him the death penalty. See, while my guy was in Supermax, he managed to slip his cuffs, beat a guard to death with a metal bar, and throw his battered corpse down the stairs. All of this is on video. There's no question he did it. So the jury deliberates for like a day before they give him the long goodbye. By the time I get the case, it's about reviewing his eligibility for the death penalty. So I dig into his case file for the testimony that appeared at trial, and there's all this stuff about huge problems with his cognitive ability and like his actual brain structure. So, with the supervising lawyers okay, I do a little independent research, consolidate all the different testimony and map it onto a brain. The conclusion I come to is pretty simple. This motherfucker has less than half a brain. Through a combination of drug use, abuse, and birth defects, roughly half of my client's brain just is not present anymore in any meaningful way. Including all the centers that regulate hormone production, fight or flight response, and threat assessment. I find a bunch of medical reports where people with just some of these conditions get severe behavior imbalances, and in at least one case psychotic episodes. Basically, I help establish that this guy has the kind of diminished capacity that makes him ineligible for the death penalty under Atkins. If he's successful on an Atkins claim, then he is structurally ineligible for the death penalty. But do I feel good about helping to probably save this guy's life? Fuck no. Because it means he's going to be in a Supermax forever, and he's already shown that he can kill people in a Supermax. If he doesn't get the death penalty, he'll still be in prison for life, and I can almost guarantee that he will injure or kill another guard during that time, probably multiple ones. But if he's put to death, we're executing someone who really isn't meaningfully responsible for their crimes, because most of their brain is gone. He never had the option to make the right decision, or make any decision, because of his incredibly extensive brain damage. It's out of my hands now, but they are appealing, so it's gonna go before the court eventually. I drank a lot that semester, and I'll never do death penalty work again. Story 18. The one I particularly hated happened at my first law job. This woman was a long-term client of my boss. In the past 10 years or so, she has been caught driving under the influence 8 times, violated home incarceration countless times, been caught with controlled substances a few times, and stabbed 2 people on home incarceration. My boss at the time was the master of getting people off for DUIs, so she had only been convicted of a DUI third and always managed to stay on home incarceration with whatever releases she desired. I always regretted her cases because that woman is truly a danger to the public. She's undoubtedly going to kill someone someday. But I'll be damned if she isn't the luckiest woman alive in getting away with DUIs. Story 19. Guy was a convicted felon, so couldn't be in possession of any firearms. He pawned 2 guns that were traced back to him by the pawn shop paperwork. He said they were his and put his thumbprint on the papers, also had store clerk say he walked in carrying them. His story was that his girlfriend's mom found them after her father died, they were his, and wanted to get rid of them. So girlfriend, also convicted felon, asked him to help sell them, which he did. DA office refused to waive the 3-year man prison sentence, so it went to trial. I was the prosecutor when it went and ultimately got a guilty. The guy had to do 3 years day for day. I felt bad because I think his story was true, but he had a conviction for armed robbery and sexual battery from 30 years ago, so that was why the office wouldn't agree to reduce the sentence. Story 20. I represented this construction worker in a divorce. The wife stayed at home with the kids and had no money. Through entire divorce, her attorney claimed that my client was hiding money. They had no evidence and the client vehemently denied it. We had a good settlement in the case and I considered it done. When the client came in a few weeks later to pick his file, he thanked me for my work and said, "And she never did find the money I hid." He had a big laugh and walked away. What a dick. Story 21. I'm a paralegal, not a lawyer. I worked very closely on a case where the client had violently raped their spouse. It was clear from the beginning that the client was mentally unstable and very capable of doing this same type of thing again. We ended up winning because the victim was a young woman, her demeanor during the trial was atrocious, and the jury was all older men. Story 22. Not really winning, but I recently had a case settle where my client was so obviously lying it was painful. He was an offender bender and said he was too disabled to drive or to work at the office as a result, and that his employer fired him after he had been on disability leave for almost a year. A few months after filing, we discovered that he played in a national, amateur, full-contact football league, and there was footage of him getting tackled, end-zone dancing, and tackling during the time he claimed he was too hurt to sit at a desk. Even when I confronted him on it, he claimed he hadn't played while he was injured, despite having a stat line and footage of him playing from games dated on days he was supposedly getting physical therapy. We didn't settle for as much as most of my cases, but he still walked away with like $20,000. I'm happy to be a plaintiff's attorney for the most part because my clients have typically been wronged, but he was such a bald-faced liar it really pissed me off. Story 23. Summer of 2018, I get work regarding what seemed, from the client's description, a pretty drawn-out and messy divorce case. The husband was my client, and he made it seem, very adamantly, that his soon-to-be ex-wife was after his every penny. Given he seemed to have a fairly high-paying job, it seemed like a pretty common type of case. The city I work in has many instances of this. It has a high cost of living and a lot of well-paid working professionals in private industry. He was a very well-spoken, amicable guy in his late 50s, and truly seemed like he'd been taken by surprise and betrayed by his soon-to-be ex-wife. When I actually got to the case, however, I was basically floored. His wife was a working professional as well, worked in government, they'd been married for over 20 years, and had 2 kids together, and a paid-off house. Before taxes he made almost 3 times what she did, not counting his stock options, and yet she'd contributed equally to their mortgage on every home they'd owned over the course of the marriage. By all accounts, despite a vast difference in income, she'd carried her weight, raised 2 kids, and worked full-time during the entirety of the marriage. I live and work in Canada. She could have easily raked him over the coals in the divorce if it had gone to court. Instead, it seemed like she'd done everything she possibly could to not have him subjected to that. This divorce had been ongoing for 5 years before he hired me, and it was basically him looking a gift horse in the mouth over and over, a constant renegotiation on the contract they'd both signed initially, with him skimping on alimony and then debating on lesser terms. He was basically given an inch and tried to take a mile, dragging it out for so long that per divorce law it had to go to court. I almost suspect he did so as a way to try and drag her through the mud, though he may have genuinely been that delusional. I consider it a win only because his ex-wife was adamant about only wanting what was somewhat fair, and for it to be over because of the strain it was having on the family. Per the contract he owed her, still, about $50K in back pay, but she was content with $15K, which was less than this guy made in a month. I did regret the win, though. She seemed like a very nice woman with the patience of a saint, while almost all of his anger towards her seemed to come from wounded ego. Story 24. My mom is a lawyer who worked a case against one of those if you or a loved one were affected by a drug suits. The drug was, in some cases, causing heart issues. Important to note, stress can cause heart issues as well. The suit was filed by a slimy law firm who were telling people that they could win money, even if people were not actually experiencing the side effects. One of these clients had a brain tumor, recently had a nasty divorce, and her son had just died, among all sorts of other terrible luck. Her heart issues did not match the side effects of the drug, and instead looked stress-related, so my mom had to cross-examine this woman, asking, "Could your inoperable brain tumor be causing you stress? Could your divorce from your abusive husband be causing you stress? Could the death of your young son be causing you stress?" That woman's case was dismissed, but my mom felt terrible. Story 25. I handle employment cases. We took a disability accommodation case against a regional retail company. To be clear, we were right. Our client was not being given a pretty easy accommodation. Normally, demand letters don't have any real effect. We have stopped sending them to streamline the process and have just started filing with the EEOC or the courts directly. That's SOP for us. In this case, we followed SOP and filed with the EEOC. The company got in touch with us immediately, expressing horror and regret. The whole thing was one poorly trained manager acting out. While that's common, companies usually try to cover for the manager and often make things worse. This one did not. They immediately sent him to be retrained, offered the exact accommodation requested, and paid all lost wages and fees, with some extra for emotional distress. Client happily accepted and went back to work. After seeing the company's great response, I felt bad for taking them to the EEOC. Not bad enough to start sending time-wasting demand letters again, but if I ever see them on the other side, I'll make an exception. Edit. I almost wish there was no confidentiality provision in the settlement agreement. Would love to say who this was and tell people that they're a great company. I now prefer shopping with them over their competitors, since I know they're an upstanding group. Every company fucks up sometimes. Not many acknowledge it and try to make it right when they do. Story 26. My first case as a lawyer was a probate case. Husband and wife each had 3 adult children from prior marriages. Husband killed wife and then killed himself. I represented the husband's estate. The kids all hated each other. Wife's kids obviously blamed the husband for killing their mom, and the husband's kids blamed the wife for making him crazy enough to kill himself. The husband had multiple properties and was a prominent attorney before the murder-suicide. We had multiple walkthroughs of the property with both sets of kids and lawyers, and needed sheriffs there each time because the kids were threatening to kill each other constantly. Story 27. Represented someone in the sale of a bar. Buyers of the bar were only buying the business. Most of their free cash was set as a signing payment to the seller, so seller got the cash whether or not the liquor authority approved their license. They allowed the seller to secure the sales contract and the rental agreement for the bar location with a lien on their license, and buyers pre-signed an agreement to surrender the license back to seller if they fell behind on payments. Inventory was sold separately. We got buyers to accept tax liability, if any, for the preceding business. We also told them the seller had only paid themselves in dividends and never cut a paycheck to themselves. Buyers were clueless enough to breathe a sigh of relief at this. Made buyers acknowledge they received the sales agreement 10 days before closing and that we were advising they consult an attorney and an accountant in that time. They didn't. One of the most one-sided business deals I've seen. Buyers came back 2 months later, and I thought, here we go. Nope. They had a disagreement with some investors and wanted me to represent them. Sorry, conflicted out. Business, of course, failed on down the road and the license went back to the seller. Story 28. Not my case, but a former associate of mine won a PPO motion hearing, personal protective order, where he represented the person who the order would have been put against, not the victim. The victim's request to put a PPO on his client was denied, and like 2 months later the victim ended up getting put into the hospital by the client. He beat her ass. That one still bothers him. Story 29. A few pop to mind. First, the one where the client never paid said above is absolutely right. Poured a ton of effort and emotion into a case and got a great result only to get stiffed. No, it's cool. I made sure they didn't foreclose on the family farm, but just ignore my bills. Second, we settled the case while the jury was out. We were the defendant, so we were potentially on the hook for some amount of money if the jury found us liable. While they were deliberating, we agreed to pay something. The jury came back, found us not liable at all. So we won and still had to pay the agreed-to amount. And third, appeals that I've won. I've gotten very good results on appeal. Sometimes, the remedy is that you go back to the trial court and do it all over again, reverse and remand. Surprise! The trial court judge who made boneheaded mistake that got reversed is not happy to see me. Story 30. I helped represent a slumlord in a lawsuit regarding discrimination in public housing based on disability. The state was representing the disabled tenant. The facts were pretty clear. Slumlord discriminated on the basis of disability. Our state doesn't have much case law regarding discrimination in housing based on disability. So the state was really hoping to make case law. We ended up sowing enough doubt to survive the tenant's motion for summary judgment. Knowing that the tenant needed money, we made an offer for a decent amount of money for a disabled tenant, but peanuts for the slumlord. I imagine the state wanted to proceed to trial, but the tenant needed money and accepted. By gaining the best outcome for our client, we allowed the slumlord to get off basically scot-free and deprived our state of needed case law. Story 31. I won $1 million work injury claim, completely blanked the claimant on behalf of the employer and their insurer, then withstood the appeal. I regret it not because the claimant had a legit claim, he didn't, he was full of shit, and not because I liked opposing counsel, I don't, he's the biggest dick in town. I regret it because my fucking asshole insurance company client only paid about 1/3 of my very modest bill. Fuck those guys. Thanks for watching and subscribe to Basic Spoon for more daily Reddit content.